Welcome to Oil Painting Question and Answers, episode number 10. In this episode, before we get to the questions, I wanted to talk about a color checker and how to use a color checker and some of the issues that arise when you use one. We've had several questions regarding, can I use a color checker in plein air, or can I use a color checker with my computer monitor? And so we're going to get to some of those questions. I also wanted to show you my brand new design color checker, and we're selling these at genevafineart.com right now. And you can make your own color checker by watching a free video on drawmixpaint.com, but if you don't want to make your own, then we're selling these now at genevafineart.com. And this is my very latest design of a color checker. If you've never used a color checker before, you just hold it out at arm's length and look through the circle, and the bottom half here is where you put your paint, and this is where you look through, so that if you want, you can compare your paint color to whatever the subject is that you're looking at. So you just hold it out and you can match colors like that. I invented the color checker back in 2001, and then in 2007 I started selling them, and we sold them for several years, but it was a much simpler design. It was just a little piece of bent metal, basically. But there were a few issues with that design, and this one is better. Number one, the old design was very small and you held it in your hand, and so the circle was set right above your hand. So if you were trying to check a spot of color, let's say on a vase, and you held out your hand was blocking the whole bottom part of the still life that you're looking at, or whatever the subject is. And by having this distance here, where this circle is floating much higher than where you hold it down here, that allows you, when I look at, a still life or a portrait or whatever I'm mixing colors for, now this circle is floating way up inside the still life, or whatever the subject is, and you don't have your hand blocking it. So that's number one, and that makes it a lot easier, because you can imagine, now let's say you're painting a vase and you're trying to match a spot of color on the vase, and if you can't even see where the bottom line of the vase is, it's going to be harder for you to position exactly where that color is. But with this one, you can see the bottom line of the vase, and it makes it that much easier to sort of pick out where that spot of color is, because your view's not being blocked by your hand. So that's a real big issue, and something that this new one solves. And then the other thing about this color checker is it's got a base built right into it, so that if you set it on a table like that, you don't have to, you can just set it down anywhere you want. You don't have to have a stand that holds it. You don't have to lay it on its side so paint's not getting on your table. It's just got a stand built right in. And then the last thing is these are separate, so that this is all polished stainless steel, and we polish these by hand. So when you want to wipe off this part, it's real easy to wipe off, and you're not going to your rag or your paper towel's not going to get paint on this part over here. So it's just a real nice solid design, and these are stainless steel and just built to last 100 years. And so that's our new color checker. So now let me talk about some of the issues of using a color checker in various situations that might arise. And first of all, let me tell you that I always recommend working from life, especially if you're starting and learning for the first time. It's very difficult to get good photo sources, and that's a whole different can of worms dealing with photography. So if you can set up a still life in your studio and work from life, that is a fantastic way to learn how to paint. And using a color checker simplifies all of that, because you can match your colors right from life, and it's just as pure as it gets. When you check a color with a color checker, you are looking at the very same color that your eye sees. There's no interpretation, there's no making a photo print, or all the issues that come up with photography. And also, working from life in a lot of ways is just, you don't focus as much on the super detail, and it just works. And so I highly recommend working from a still life if you're just starting out. It's all covered in drawmixpaint.com. There's free videos. There's video on color checker basics, or how to mix colors, and all of those issues that you need to know are covered there for basic color checker use, especially working in a studio from a still life. So one of the first issues that you have to deal with whenever you're using a color checker is that you don't want you have to have the same amount of light on your color checker as your subject. And if that changes throughout the day or while you're working on your painting, then everything's going to get, your values are going to get all skewed. And what I mean by that is, let's say, you know, if you were working, sitting by a window, and your subject was over, you know, in a shadow box, and light was hitting it, and all of a sudden a cloud went by the window, and now your color checker is dark compared to what you were looking at, you know, 10 minutes ago, then obviously that's going to create issues for you with your values. So you have to have consistent light. Now that would be the same if you were working plein air. If you were painting outdoors and you know, it was a partly cloudy day and clouds came in and made it dark, and then it got bright and it kept shifting back and forth. I mean, those are things that plein air artists have to, you know, deal with anyway. So that's just something that you have to keep in mind. So you want to really make sure that when you balance your whites, meaning when you put some white paint on your color checker and you're comparing it to some white paint in your subject, that doesn't change over time. So this relates to some of the issues that come up when you're working with plein air or painting plein air. If you're sitting in the shadow of a tree and you've got, you know, you're in the shadow of a tree and you're trying to match the color to the grass, which is out in bright sunlight, well, there's no way that you're going to be able to put paint color on your color checker sitting in the shadow of the tree and hold it out and compare it to some sunlight that's hitting the grass. The grass is going to be way brighter. So you would have to actually be out in the sunlight just like the grass is. Again, the same amount of light has to be on your color checker as it is on your subject. And so therefore, if you're painting something that's in the sun, then you also have to be in the sun with your color checker. You can't be over in the shadow. It just won't work. Another issue that would come up was if you were going to paint a sunset, where this sunset is basically the light source, and you hold out your color checker is just going to be a dark silhouette against that sky, and it's not going to work. Now, if you were painting, you know, under a cloudy sky, and you're out under the same sky that your subject is, then there's no problem. It's the same amount of light that's hitting your color checker. So in those situations, you can use a color checker just fine. And what I would recommend is, as far as painting sunsets or you know, other things like bright skies or any situation that you cannot use a color checker, really you have to remember the color checker is a learning tool. And you know, after you do 5 or 10 paintings using a color checker, you really start to develop an instinct for color and value. And so you would take that instinct and just paint the sunset, you know, to the best of your ability without a color checker. And I've seen many, many of my students do that very same thing. There's one other issue, and that's glare, and getting glare on your color checker, but that's really not hard to understand. A lot of people get confused by this. The only place that glare can come from on your color checker is you hold out your color checker, and above and straight ahead is where the glare comes from. So that if you hold out your color checker and you see glare on there, it's absolutely coming from, you just look straight ahead and then up, and that's where your glare is coming from. It doesn't come from anywhere else. So therefore, if there's a big bright window up above your color checker, straight above, then you're going to get glare from it. Same thing would go if you had a, you know, if you were sitting down in a, you know, in the shadow of a house, and there was a little bit of bright sky that was right there, then you might get some issue with glare. So the way that I check for glare is I hold out my color checker, and if you tilt it a little bit one way or the other, you can see the glare disappear or come back into view. And when and it's just, it helps you to be able to see whether you have glare or not. So just tilt it a little bit and kind of see what's going on, but it's always coming from a beyond and above. I'm going to do a video specifically on plein air painting using a color checker, so be looking out for that. So we'll be doing that in the future. So let me talk a little bit about using a color checker with a computer monitor. it is very common, especially with modern computer monitors, that they will adjust the brightness depending on the ambient light in the room. So that you might have your computer monitor set and it's a certain brightness during the day, and then at night the screen will actually darken down or change depending on the light in the room. So you got to be really careful, because you might balance your white, and the way you balance the light is just put anything bright, white on your screen. It could be even a web page, and then hold out your color checker, put white paint on your color checker, and the white paint on your color checker should be the same value as whatever is white in your computer monitor. But you might balance your whites and say, okay, my white paint matches the white paint or the white screen on my computer monitor, and then all of a sudden, an hour later, your screen darkens down because the ambient light changed, and then your white balance is going to be all off. So really got to make sure that your computer monitor doesn't change the brightness level while you're working. That's number one. Number two is you don't want to be so close to the monitor that the monitor is actually lighting the paint on your color checker. And the reason for that is because if you get real close and you're holding out your color checker down in the bottom, now the whole monitor is lighting up the paint on your color checker. And then you check a color up at the top, and now it's not lighting it hardly at all because it's up here and it's not able to light the paint. And if that's happening, that's going to really throw your values, because down here your paint's going to be lit much more, and up here it's going to be lit much less. So that has to be consistent. The way you deal with that is just don't get so close to the monitor. Be 2.5 feet away, and then just check your colors just as you would if you were working from life. It's no different. And the only other issue, and this is again, is if you get real close and you're checking your color, if you're just right up on your computer monitor, you're going to get some glare from the brightness of your computer monitor. Again, like I said, it's beyond and above. So if I'm holding it down here and my computer monitor's here, it's going to be putting glare on the color checker. So the simplest way to deal with all of that is just to be about 2.5 feet away from your computer monitor, and you won't have any problems. But you do need to still be aware of room glare, just as you would working from life, or making sure that it's balanced. But again, the way you balance it is just put white paint here, pull up a bright white web page, and just make the white paint on your color checker the same brightness as the white you see in your monitor. But again, be sure it doesn't change brightness, because that'll really throw everything. So that's about it. If you want to learn more about how to use a color checker, just go to drawmixpaint.com and watch some of the free videos, especially the color mixing video and the how to use our color checker basics video. And also go check out this new color checker that we're selling at genevafineart.com, and that's it. So now let's get into some viewers' questions. When painting glass objects from life and similar, small changes in head position can cause large changes in reflections and colors. Do you have any tips for maintaining the exact same viewing position? Sure. If you will just, when you start off, just you can hang a string. If you've got a shadow box, for instance, if you hang a string out, in the front, just over the roof coming down, doesn't matter where you put it, but just somewhere kind of toward the front of your still life. And then you have and then line it up with something on the back. You could even put a little piece of tape, just a teeny little piece of tape in the back, and that way when you want to check your reflections or whatever it is, just move your head left or right, and you can line up your string with the mark in the back, and you know that you're good to go. But I wouldn't worry too much about it. When it comes to painting just the reflections, then you can pinpoint, line your spot up with your string, and then paint the reflections when you know everything's exactly the way you want it. But the other way is don't even worry about a string, just have two objects. And if you can just find a spot where, say, the edge of your vase lines up with something in the background or an object behind it, then you can, line those two objects up. But it just takes 2 points, one in the front and one in the back. Do you usually frame your completed work, have it framed, or leave it unframed? Do frames make a difference in profit in your experience? I've always thought that putting a beautiful, expensive frame, when I say expensive, or a frame that looks expensive, on your painting is going to greatly increase the look of the painting, or how expensive it looks. And even gallery owners that you might think can see through, whether they can look at a piece of artwork and judge it independent of the frame. But if you walk into a gallery and every painting you have is in a real nice, and it doesn't have to be complicated or gaudy or anything, it can just be a simple frame, but a frame that looks expensive and has got some weight to it. Not a little skimpy frame, but something that's got some weight. It puts a frame around the painting. It just makes it look more valuable. But frames are very expensive, and to go out and buy a cheap ready-made frame that looks like a cheap ready-made frame could actually make your work look cheap. So it's really a dilemma. If I was going to start my career over again, I would probably learn to make frames myself as an artist and frame my own pieces, because it would save me so much money, and it really does make a difference. But that's a tough one, because they are expensive, and only frame your best paintings that you're going to actually show to people, obviously. But that's just something that you've got to deal with. But I would learn, if it was me, I would learn to make some frames. You just got to make 2 or 3 styles, 2 or 3 types, and you can buy the molding, and you can learn to paint it, and you can learn to put a coat on it and lay the gold leaf into it. All that is doable, but it's just a whole nother, craft that you have to learn. But that's what I would do. But yeah, I think it does make a difference, and that's something to consider for sure. In watching your video on how to mix colors, you recommend a procedure for mixing good steps. If there is only a limited value range in the sky, why would you make more steps than is necessary? Do you stop making steps when you determine you have covered the full value range? First of all, steps are not as important. The size of your step, and for those of you that aren't familiar with my method, we're talking about if you were going to mix the colors for a vase, you start with the very darkest color you can see in the vase, which would be the very darkest color down in the shadow. And you would mix in small steps, getting lighter and lighter and lighter until you got to the highlight. And so the number of those steps, or how big of a, how many steps you need to mix from this very darkest to this very lightest, is really, again, it's not important, the exact size of your steps, but roughly from black to if you were going to go from black all the way to white, which would be the biggest range you could do, you might have 12, and that would be a lot. But you could have as little as, say, 8, and that would be acceptable. So there's really it's not going to affect the quality of your work. I never mix the right amount of steps. Sometimes I mix more, sometimes I mix less. The only time the only place it really is important is I try to have a small step from black. So if I make black, then my first step from black, which is a color that's almost black, is just barely lighter than black. And I like to have that so that I can get in there and paint those deep, shadows that I need. And to have too big of a step from black creates problems. So that's why I recommend that. But other than that, it's pretty straightforward, and don't worry about it. Yes, in terms of something that has a few steps, in other words, like a sky where the darkest part is not really that dark, and the lightest part is, there's not that many steps to go up, you might only have 2 or 3 or 4 steps. Sometimes when you're painting black, for instance, or like a dark fabric in the back of your still life, there might only be 2 or 3 steps in there, because it's just from black to, it's just not very big. So yeah, that's how you would handle that. What do you think about lead-based white paints like Cremnitz white? I'm quite new to painting, and I'm trying to figure out which paints to have on my palette, and I've heard that titanium white can be quite chalky when mixed with cadmium paints, and also that lead paint is better for painting flesh because it's more transparent. There's some, whether you use titanium or flake, or flake white, which is the same as Cremnitz white, lead white, is comparing it to titanium white. The only difference in terms of mixability and everything is that titanium is much more opaque, as you mentioned, And because it's more opaque, you just use less of it, and it's as simple as that. So, if you were trying to mix some power orange, for instance, you might, get a little bit more, a stronger color with flake just because it's transparent, and so some of the color will come through. But that's only in extreme colors. I actually prefer titanium white to flake because it's more opaque. When I first started painting for the first few years, I used Cremnitz white myself, but I only used it because lead whites form a much stronger paint film. They're more resistant to cracking, and so I was thinking about that. But once I started having children running around the studio, I got rid of all my lead paint because I didn't want to risk the toxic part of the lead. But there are no, if a color looks too chalky, it just means that you use too much white. So just back off on your white, use more yellow instead of white. But there are no, using titanium is not going to bring chalkiness into your painting, unless, if you're used to using lead white, which is weaker and more transparent, and all of a sudden somebody puts titanium on your palette, it's going to really, seem to overpower your colors because you're not used to it. But you just use a little bit less, or a lot less if you have to. So no problem with the titanium, and I would recommend the titanium. I just like the fact that it's more opaque. It's a lot easier to work with. Your Geneva paint looks great. I understand that it is already mixed with the correct amount of your medium, but should one wish to paint thin underlayers, which medium thinner would you suggest with these paints so as to not upset their characteristics? I think that if you're talking about, thinning it down, the problem, if you could add more oil to thin paint down, but that wouldn't work in an underpainting because you want to observe fat over lean. So therefore, you wouldn't want to add linseed oil, and you could just thin it down with mineral spirits. But then you're dealing with solvents, and you're dealing with the fumes, and you got to make sure you have adequate ventilation and everything else, just like you do with traditional oil paint. But you can certainly do it, and it should work just fine. And then what happens is the mineral spirits evaporates out of the paint film, so that if you thin it down with mineral spirits, it's going to just very quickly. It won't take much. It'll allow it to be much more fluid, and then once the mineral spirits evaporates out, it's as if you painted it with just unadulterated Geneva paint. Now, if you wanted to when you put your other layer on top of that, you're going to need to add a few drops of refined linseed oil to your paint so that your upper layer has got a higher percentage of fat or higher percentage of oil than the lower layer. So just make sure that you do that. How do you feel about the word talent? I personally prefer the word skilled. I think that the particular set of skills I sharpen are what allows me to paint the way that I like, not a natural-born gift that required nothing. I 100% agree with you. I can't tell you how many people that I've taught to paint who told me, oh, I can't draw a stick figure, or I wish I had talent. And everybody, when I run into people and talk about teaching painting, and they say, what do you do? And I say, oh, I teach people to paint, blah, blah, blah. And then the first thing they say is, oh, I wish I could paint, but I don't have any talent. And it's just, it's really passion is the talent. Passion is the thing that drives you. You're either going to be the type of person that's going to put one foot in front of another and buy your paint, get your brushes, set up your little studio. None of those things are insurmountable at all. You can just do it, but I don't know what happens, whether it's a confidence thing. People, the moment they start thinking about painting, or they go down to the art store and they're looking at these tubes of paint and they say, who am I kidding? I can't do this. And I've tried years to dispel that myth. It is really about just putting one foot in front of the other and doing the steps. You can go to drawmixpaint.com and do the course. And it's the people that actually do it. And what can I say? I wish I could prove it, but I can tell you from experience, you have to believe me. I have taught so many people that said I can't paint or I don't have any talent, and then they're painting incredible paintings, incredible realism at the highest level. So it can absolutely be learned by anybody. And I really do believe that. But you got to have passion. You know, you got to be somebody that's going to go into your studio and put in the time. You know, you can't do one painting a year. You're just not going to learn like that. You've got to do, you know, you got to paint on a fairly regular basis. Well, that's it for this episode. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to go check out our new color checkers at genevafineart.com, and we have some printable color wheels on the same page as the color checker, so you can go there and get that if that interests you. And if you have any questions or comments for me, leave them in the comment section of this video, and I'll get to as many of those questions as I can next week. Thanks for watching.